Friends and travelers, however you've arrived, I bid you welcome. Here at Let's Be Frank, we're about lives, and above all, living well. But I don't suppose a podcast hosted by Benjamin Franklin could be about anything else. In my lifetime, I pursued the practice of moral improvement like a science, recording my successes, and yes, oftentimes reveling in my failings. It's my hope, with our weekly almanac, to deliver to a curious world delicious morsels of history in quick, easy to digest installments, perfect for a sit in your favorite chair or a morning walk to work. At the end of each installment, I like to wrap it up in a neat little lesson you can apply to your own life, taken from the events, stories, and personalities shared in each episode. So sit back, relax, and together, let's make history. Greetings and salutations, dear listener. Welcome to the Season 3 finale of Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind with me, your faithful friend and host, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. Follow B. Franklin Live across the myriad of social media platforms we are active on. B. Franklin Live on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind. Review and subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And my friends, if you wish to support the history we try to make every day and become active in our mission to empathetically connect the present with the past, consider joining our Patreon community. Now, more than ever, my beloved friend, we need you. And let's be frank, at present, we take no money from advertisers. We are completely listener-funded. And every day, we're looking at making history in new and innovative ways. And we want you to be a part of that journey. So join our Patreon at whatever level you can. Take advantage of the benefits we are endeavoring to add every day. And above all, my beloved Junto, join a community that every day becomes more supportive, more engaging, and, dare I say it, more fun. It's been a historic week in 2024, but what was going on in Ben Franklin's life this June? Well, the obvious answer to that will be covered in today's installment. But you can find much more in this week's edition of This Past Week. This Past Week is a Patreon exclusive series where every week I bring you a primary source associated with Ben Franklin's life from the day or week that our episode releases. This week's edition of This Past Week features none other than a letter from an alter ego of mine, the infamous Silence Dogood, a widow who, upon occasion, puts forward notes of wisdom, something I adopted while running the Pennsylvania Gazette to engage with more readers. As you can see, my beloved Junto, I have a long history of impersonating someone else in the media that I create. Now, this letter of Silence Dogood speaks upon the topic of pride and unfolds all sorts of wisdom within. So join our Patreon and get a more feminine perspective on our weekly almanac. Our Patreon is also at present voting upon what our fourth season will be. So please, my friends, join now so you can take part in that democratic action and decide what Let's Be Frank's fourth season will cover. With that out of the way, we can get to today's installment. Now today, my friends, is the thrilling climax to this season's arc. We've been exploring all season the history of electrical experiments, and it all culminates in a perfect storm, pun very much intended, as we talk about my famed experiment with the key in the kite. So, in our last installment, we talked about some of my earlier electrical experiments and observations. We talked about my poultry mistake with the turkey, the examination of the Leyden jar. So let's pick up the story with the hypothesis that I develop and the eventual execution to prove it. Now, by 1749, I had developed quite a reputation in my correspondence and examinations for electricity. I had wrote to Peter Collinson, my friend in England, and Mr. Collinson had shared some of my observations with the Royal Academies of both London and France. By 1749, I addressed my dear friend Mr. Mitchell, sharing hypotheses upon thunder gusts, and beginning to examine whether the electrical phenomenons we observe in our experiments are the same electricity we begin to see in the sky. On November 7th of that same year, I put forward a series of minutes that poses the question, that self-same question, whether the electricity in our experiments and the electricity in the sky is the same electrical fire. I make note on November 7th that some form of experiment must be developed to prove it. These observations and experiments would be translated into several languages, would foster a series of experiments that spanned oceans, continents, and lines of nationalities. But by the spring of 1752, the hypothesis had gained enough traction that people were beginning to develop their own experiments. In fact, in May of 1752, several Parisians put forward their own experiments based upon my notes. I knew full well if I was going to continue and truly leave a mark upon the scientific world, I too would need to put forward an experiment. Thankfully, upon the 10th of June, the conditions were perfect to try the experiment. Now, my friends, there are only two sources that survive upon my famed kite experiment. It's become a piece of almost American folklore, mythic in its properties, where everyone has a general idea of what transpired, but what in fact transpired is brief in its summary. So for this installment, my beloved Junto, I will share the two sources that survive without the speculation and share the aftermath that follows. The first primary source comes from a letter to my friend Peter Collinson in October of 1752, several months after the experiment took place. These are my own words. So allow me to conjure your imaginations as I transport you back over 200 years ago to where we sit now on the 10th of June, 1752. Sir, as frequent mention is made in public papers from Europe of the success of the Philadelphia experiment for drawing the electric fire from clouds by means of pointed rods of iron erected on high buildings, etc., it may be agreeable to the curious to be informed that the same experiment has succeeded in Philadelphia, though made in different and more easy manner, which is as follows. Make a small cross of 2 light strips of cedar, the arms so long as to reach the 4 corners of a large, thin silk handkerchief when extended. Tie the corners of the handkerchief to the extremities of the cross so you have the body of a kite, which being properly accommodated with a tail, loop, and string, will rise in the air like those made of paper. But this being of silk is fitter to bear the wet and wind of a thunder gust without tearing. To the top of the upright stick of the cross is to be fixed a very sharp pointed wire, rising a foot or more above the wood. To the end of the twine, next to the hand, is to be tied a silk ribbon, and where the silk and twine join, a key to be fastened. This kite is to be raised when a thunder gust appears to be coming on, and the person who holds the string must stand within a door or window or under some cover, so that the silk ribbon may not be wet. And care must be taken that the twine does not touch the frame of the door or window. As soon as any of the thunderclouds come over the kite, the pointed wire will draw the electric fire from them, and the kite with all the twine will be electrified, and the loose filaments of the twine will stand out every way and be attracted by an approaching finger. And then when the rain has wet the kite and twine so that it can conduct the electric fire freely, you will find the stream out plentifully from the key of the approach of your knuckles. At this key the file may be charged, and the electrical fire thus obtained. Spirits may be kindled, and all the electric experiments be performed, which are usually done by the help of a rubbed glass globe or tube, and thereby the sameness of the electric matter with that lightning completely demonstrated. Now you might remember, my beloved Junto, the discussion of Leyden jars, or conductors, things that can hold electrical fire to allow you to conduct electrical experiments. That's what I'm writing in this letter to my friend Collinson. What you find in this source is less narrative of that fateful experiment, but rather instructions of how it can be repeated. And I like to think, my beloved Junto, that is very much how you might summarize my character. I am a creature built for narrative and humorous anecdote, but very little in regards to science. Because when it has come to scientific progress, I rarely wished the fame to rely solely upon me, though my vanity very much enjoyed the fame, but more of how others can take that charge, that fire, that spirit, and use it to forward idea, thought, innovation, science. Now, the other primary source will come over a decade later, and would come from a scientist by the name of Joseph Priestley. Joseph Priestley was an English theologian, clergyman, and natural philosopher. He's credited with a number of discoveries, including the invention of soda water. So thank Priestley the next time you open a LaCroix. And we made acquaintance during my time in England. And it was over that time that Priestley began to discuss with me the details of the experiment. From Priestley's account comes a primary source, which in my time was a secondary source, since in interviewing me, he learned of the kite experiment over 10 years after it happened. This is Priestley's account. To demonstrate, in the completest manner possible, the sameness of the electric fluid with the matter of lightning, Dr. Franklin, astonishing as it must have appeared, contrived actually to bring lightning from the heavens by means of an electrical kite, which he raised when a storm of thunder was perceived to be coming on. This kite had a pointed wire fixed upon it, by which it drew the lightning from the clouds. This lightning descended by the hempen firing, and was received by a key, tied to the extremity of it, that part of the string which was held in his hand being of silk, that the electric wire might stop when it came to the key. He found that the string would conduct electricity even when nearly dry, but that when it was wet it would conduct it quite freely, so that it would stream out plentifully from the key at the approaching of one's finger. At this key he charged files, and from electric fire thus obtained he kindled spirits and performed all other electrical experiments which are usually exhibited by an excited globe or tube. As every circumstance relating to so capital a discovery as this, the greatest, perhaps, that has been made in the whole compass of philosophy since the time of Sir Isaac Newton, cannot but give pleasure to all my readers, I shall endeavor to gratify them with the communication of a few particulars which I have from the best authority, that being myself. The doctor, having published his method of verifying his hypothesis concerning the sameness of electricity with the matter of lightning, was waiting for the erection of a spire in Philadelphia to carry his views into execution, not imagining that a pointed rod of a moderate height could answer the purpose, when it occurred to him that by means of a common kite he could have a readier and better access to the regions of thunder than by any spire whatever. Preparing, therefore, a large silk handkerchief and 2 cross sticks of a proper length, on which to extend it, he took the opportunity of the first approaching thunderstorm to take a walk into a field, in which there was a shed convenient for his purpose. But dreading the ridicule which too commonly attends unsuccessful attempts in science, he communicated his intended experiment to nobody but his son, who assisted him in raising the kite. The kite, being raised, a considerable time elapsed before there was any appearance of it being electrified. One very promising cloud had passed over without any effect, when at length, just as he was beginning to despair of his contrivance, he observed some loose threads of the hempen string to stand erect, and to avoid one another, just as if they had been suspended on a common conductor. Struck with this promising appearance, he immediately presented his knuckle to the key, and let the reader judge of the exquisite pleasure he must have felt at that moment. The discovery was complete. He perceived a very evident electric spark. Others succeeded, even before the string was wet, so as to put the matter past all dispute. And when the rain had wetted the string, he collected electric fire very copiously. This happened in June, 1752, a month after the electricians in France had verified the same theory, before he had heard of anything that had been done. I will still get the credit, not only of proving that electricity and lightning are one and the same, but to some that I discovered electricity itself. Like Newton with the apple, somehow the folklore passed that Ben Franklin snatched lightning from the sky, as will one day be told in eulogy on remembering me. But you have to consider, my friends, if we distance ourselves from our time, where so much seems to be known at any given moment, the near alchemy that must have seemed to have taken place, the act of sorcery, magic, conjuration that must be evident in that time, an event witnessed only by two people who by the end of their lives were not even speaking to one another, an event witnessed by few, but somehow remembered by thousands. I think that quite a beautiful thing, my beloved Junto. And I think it moves me to the lesson for today's installment. We have no certainty in our time. I famously say, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. But what does the inverse of that mean? How can two spread and corroborate something that took place? The lesson for today's installment, and I think for this season, my beloved Junto, as I move through my own individual trials and tribulations of telling stories in 2024 on this platform, is that it does not matter when you catch your lightning. It does not matter when you catch your lightning. All that matters is that you do. It does not matter who you tell. It matters instead how you tell it, to wit, viz., how you share what you discover with others. Will you pass it as a narrative to brag about your personal lives, or will you use it for the utility of allowing others to better theirs? There is the lesson, my beloved friends, my dear children, my esteemed Junto. It matters not when you catch your lightning, just that you catch it. It matters not how you tell the story. What matters only is how you make people's lives better by doing it. This season has been an interesting one, my dear friends. This new format of conversation, wholly fascinating. And we have a good deal of work ahead of us. But I cherish this time we have together. I cherish the stories we still have to tell. I hope that those I am already acquainted with, I will come to know better. And I hope for those countless I will soon be acquainted with, that you will be numerous. That's all for this season. Would that we had more hours in the day, but as always, we have nothing but time between us. Resource materials and images from this week's episode can be found in the journal of bfranklinlive.com. If you like the show, subscribe, stay up to date with all the latest gossip, follow us on social media, join our Patreon, and help us grow. But above all, my friends, spread the word and the wisdom. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors, tell your horse. I don't care. Let's make our intellectual Junto grow. And now, my friends, our time together has come to an end. Fare thee well. And always remember, when you're good to others, you are best to yourselves. Until we meet again, I remain your humble and obedient servant, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. Stay curious, my friends.